Actually, just reminded me of what you wrote in your annual shareholder letter. I'm just going to quote a little bit from it, and then we can talk about it. You said, "It's now most useful to go to the punchline. The Gilded Age seems to have so many similarities with today, both economic and societal." You talked about the Gilded Age, and then you tied it in with what we're going through right now with big tech. Walk us through what those changes could look like, those progressive changes, where we could be headed as a society.
So I think there's a pendulum in the world, and it swings between two poles. And you can take a lot of markets or a lot of industries, a lot of ideals, and basically characterize them in that context. So for example, we are in a massive move towards a more socialist definition of how society should work. And that is essentially the pendulum swinging away from trickle-down, top-down economics and effectively swinging towards a bottoms-up reallocation of social services and the quality they deliver and the prices in which they should deliver them at. Similarly, if you look at technology, we've had a pendulum that's swung between aggregated mega monolithic companies and highly fragmented disaggregated services. And the reality is that right now, I think that we are firmly in the motion of swinging things towards disaggregation. So what that means as a society is social programs are changing. I think what that means is that we're going to have a lot more things given to people at lower and lower cost. And those things will be consumed by many companies who can give that to consumers versus the few companies doing it. So what it means for tech is probably that it gets regulated, it gets taxed, it basically gets broken up. And that's sort of more a reflection of the moral temperature of society than it is on anything necessarily nefarious that these tech businesses are going to do or have done. It's just that I think people are tired of a few companies owning and controlling too much of the real estate and surface area.
It's just kind of where we're headed right now. I do want to bring this up because I know you've talked about it in the past, and I was hoping maybe you could weigh in here. Facebook, there's a lot of talk about Facebook these days. I think there's this campaign right now. You have 300 companies who have paused their advertising in the month of July. It's called the Stop Hate for Profit campaign. You worked at Facebook back in 2007. And I believe it was a Stanford talk that you kind of expressed maybe a bit of regret. I don't know if that's the right word, but you kind of talked about maybe the social networks in general kind of tearing at the social fabric. I would just like to get your update on Facebook today.
So maybe to go back to this pendulum analogy, if you look at what happened in cable news or traditional broadcast television, I think it's really instructive. In the 1940s and 50s, we had, initially 3 mega stations, NBC, CBS, ABC. And then over the course of the next 60 or 70 years, through a combination of deregulation and legislation and government incentives, as well as economic incentives by different, capital market participants, what we saw was an explosion of content. And what we saw were consumers who initially felt that 3 stations were enough, realized that they wanted 30 and then 300 and now 3,000. And I think that's exactly what's happening online, because we've started at a place where there were really, 2 or 3 major outlets. And those 2 or 3 major outlets had to serve everybody. And what I think we're finding is that it's basically impossible to serve everybody with the same product, that there is no Swiss Army knife approach that works. And so what happens, if you ask me, is what I see happening right now is that Twitter tends to be pivoting more towards the liberal left. Facebook tends to be pivoting more towards the right and the libertarian, at least in America. And I think different products, TikTok, I think, is firmly less about a political persuasion, but more of an age demographic persuasion, and largely Gen Z with some millennials, and then, folks like me who want to pretend we're still millennials. But the reality is that there is this really interesting disaggregation that's happening in media. And, these companies are media companies. And I think that governments will regulate them as such. But as that happens, other products and services will emerge that fit niche audiences, that meet the narratives that, frankly, they want to hear, in ways that I think that's just the unfortunate reality of where we are as a society, which is that it's hard to find a way in a de-escalated manner to question your assumptions without feeling attacked. And until we fix that problem, which was more sort of a moral decision by society, these products will get more and more fragmented and serve more and more niche audiences with specific kinds of content.
It's interesting, the fragmentation, the niche audiences. Does that also, I mean, I'm just kind of throwing this out here, does that open up maybe an investment opportunity? Is that something, I mean, I don't think that would be something you're interested in, but I would be curious if that's something that would be of interest from an investment perspective, looking for maybe more niche areas.
It actually is. I don't think that you'll see me doing a lot of it. It's not something that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about. I tend to prefer sort of like emerging markets that I think are early but have been de-risked, that now just need execution. This is a market where I actually think there is a tremendous amount of market risk. That's a kind of risk I don't like underwriting. So what do I mean by that? I spent a lot of time helping build Facebook, but the real problem that Facebook has isn't necessarily about Facebook, but it's that consumer sentiment and consumer desires change, and they ebb and they flow, and they can be, very peculiar and, highly hard to predict. And so you're constantly chasing. It's kind of having like a hit record and trying to land another hit song after a hit record. It's very, very hard. So that kind of market risk is not that exciting to me. Other people, I think, will underwrite it. But I think what the result will be are just an enormous number of outlets that all have niche audiences that then you find a different and interesting way of pulling together.
Hey, investors.